How could you? I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty lot where our family home once stood. All that remained was a pile of rubble. I spotted Trent casually leaning against his BMW, sipping his daily Starbucks as he scrolled on his phone without a care in the world. He slowly looked up. "Oh, hey, babe. Welcome back," he said flatly. "While you were off finding yourself at that retreat, I took care of a little house project for us." My hands trembled and tears stung my eyes. I had just returned from a wellness retreat in the mountains, hoping to regain my strength after losing Mom. Now I came home to this violation. "A little project? Trent, this was our home," I shouted. "You demolished our 25-year life without even telling me?" He shoved his phone in his suit pocket and strode towards me, his imposing figure casting a shadow my way. I stood firm. "Eliza, that old place was getting run down anyway, and we could really use your inheritance money to build ourselves a nice new modern home." His voice turned from nonchalant to a growl. I flashed back to our wedding day when I saw that sparkle in his eyes. Now all I saw was cold, hard greed. "My inheritance? Is that what this is about?" I asked in disbelief. "You destroyed our family home, my memories with Mom, just to get your hands on my money?" "Our money, or at least it should be." Trent fired back, his temper rising. "I'm fed up with you keeping everything separate. The inheritance, your savings. We're married. After everything I've given you, the luxury cars, the country club membership, our children's college funds, you owe me." I stood speechless, rage and heartbreak swirling inside me. This was the man I once loved with my full heart. Lucas and Sophie's father. Now he was a stranger consumed by avarice. "Trent, you supported this family because it's your responsibility, not some favor you did me. I was the one working long hours in the classroom while you wined and dined your CEO friends." My voice grew louder, bolstered by a lifetime's worth of suppressed resentment. "Well, one of us had to bring money into this family, though it seems teaching second graders doesn't pay like it used to," he scoffed. That tore it. I swung my hand swiftly, slapping him hard across the face. The sound cracked through the empty space where warm family memories once echoed. For a moment his face registered shock, then his lips curled into a menacing smile. "You'll regret that, Eliza," he growled, stomping back towards his flashy car. "That inheritance is mine. You can make this easy or difficult, but either way, I'll get what I deserve." I stood alone among the ruins of my life, my mother gone, my home demolished, my husband transformed into a monster. I had dedicated years to my family, putting their needs before my own. Now Trent threatened to steal my last ounce of security, convinced he was owed a cut simply for being my spouse. I sank down atop a pile of gravel that once supported our living room. This man thought he could scare me into submission, believing I'd back down as I always had. The old Eliza may have acquiesced, terrified of conflict and desperate to keep the peace. But losing Mom showed me how fragile life was. I refused to surrender myself any longer. Gripping a chunk of drywall that displayed Lucas's childhood height measurements, I made a vow. Trent underestimated my strength if he expected me to hand everything over. I would fight with my last breath to protect myself and my children. With tears drying and resolve hardening, I marched forward, the demolition debris crunched under my feet, remnants of the past, fuel for my future. I was battered but not broken. Now focused by righteous fury, I pulled out my phone to call the one person I knew would help. "Hello, Claire? It's Eliza. I hope you still have room on your caseload because I need the best divorce lawyer in town." Sitting across from Claire over lukewarm coffees, I delved back into memories I had long suppressed. "Eliza, walk me through your relationship history with Trent," Claire said gently, her voice belying her reputation as a bulldog in the courtroom. I closed my eyes, transported back over 2 decades prior. It was 1998, and at 23 years old, I was focused on kickstarting my teaching career. Trent was an up-and-coming sales executive I met through family friends. Confident and charismatic, he swept me off my feet quickly. We married within a year, and by 30, I had left my job to focus on raising our children full-time. It was always my dream to be a mom. Trent was thrilled, too. He wanted me home, tending to the kids, while he traveled for work. I strived to be the perfect wife and mother. My parents helped tremendously while Trent was away. We were a close, loving family, up until 6 months ago when we lost my father unexpectedly. My mother's health, then, took a sharp decline, following Dad's passing. "I'm so sorry, Eliza," Claire offered gently. "That must have been an incredibly painful time for you. How did Trent respond?" I sighed, anger rising as I replayed his apathetic behavior in my mind. Honestly, Trent grew increasingly impatient and cold. He hated that I was preoccupied caring for my grieving mother. He began making callous comments about me playing nurse too much. Claire frowned, jotting notes on her legal pad. "And he provided no emotional support during this period?" "None whatsoever. If anything, he often compounded my grief with his cruel reactions." My mind drifted back to one piercing incident. Mom and I were reviewing some old photo albums together, laughing and crying as we relived nostalgic memories. Trent came home unexpectedly early from a work trip. "Ugh, is this what my house has turned into? A pity party patch?" he had grumbled. "Trent," I scolded, "have some compassion. Mom just lost her husband of 40 years. And I just want my wife back. This melancholy scene needs to end." He stormed off to pour himself a scotch. Mom's fragile smile had vanished instantly, replaced by resigned sadness. We didn't look at the albums again. I shook my head, drawn back to the present moment across from Claire. So there you have it. The man I once loved disappeared, consumed entirely by selfishness. And now? My voice quivered as I recounted the image seared into my mind of our demolished home, of Trent's unconscionable betrayal. Claire leaned forward, her expression shifting to righteous anger. "Don't worry, Eliza. We're going to make him pay." Over the next weeks under Claire's counsel, I dug up documents, financial records, and Trent's vicious text messages. She was confident this evidence would land a favorable judgment. We sat across her wide oak desk reviewing our plan when Claire's phone lit up. She glanced at the screen and her eyebrows shot up. "Well, speak of the devil. It's a text from Trent. He says he wants to meet to discuss things civilly. He must have gotten wind that you lawyered up." Claire let out an icy laugh. My stomach churned, imagining his scheme. "There's no way I'm agreeing to some fake meeting just for him to intimidate me more." I know," Claire agreed. She stared pensively at her phone screen as a sly smile crept across her face. The wheels were clearly spinning behind her intelligent eyes. "Actually, Eliza, I have an idea." She leaned forward, resolve emanating from her. "What if we use this text to set a little trap for your scheming husband?" I nodded cautiously as she detailed a plan to meet Trent under the guise of good faith negotiations. But with Claire secretly recording the conversation, we could obtain hard proof of Trent's coercion and threats. My anxiety melted into tentative relief at the finally holding him accountable. As we wrapped up final preparations for the clandestine meeting, I turned to Claire, new confidence rising within me. "Let's do this. It's time for that snake to get exactly what he deserves." Claire smiled knowingly and put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Showtime!" My hands trembled as I stared down at the text from Trent confirming our clandestine meeting spot, a discreet cafe downtown far from prying eyes. Though Claire and I had devised an airtight plan to expose his deceit, doubt still gnawed at my core. What verbal assaults awaited me? How far would Trent go to pressure me into relinquishing control of my inheritance? I steeled my nerves, refusing to let past anxiety dictate my actions now. With my family's legacy and financial future at stake, failure was not an option. I arrived early at the nondescript cafe and selected a quiet corner booth, my back to the wall for full visual coverage. I set my phone on the table, discreetly pressing record before concealing it behind a napkin. The bait was laid for Trent's inevitable tirade. Now confident our trap was set, I waited. Right on cue, 15 minutes late as always, Trent sauntered in, a smug look plastered across his handsome yet hardened face. I gestured politely to the seat across from me. Showtime. "Well, Eliza, isn't this mature of us to handle things civilly?" Trent offered with mock sincerity. I nearly gagged at his attempt to take the high road after demolishing our family home without notice. Instead, I offered a flat smile. "Yes, I think it's important we have an open and honest conversation about all this." Trent shifted, clearly unsettled by my nonplussed reaction. He was likely expecting a much more volatile response he could redirect with manipulation as he had done so many times before. Good. Let him squirm a bit. I broke the silence after an awkward beat. "I'll cut right to the chase, Trent. Are you willing to negotiate fairly on separation terms? I kept my tone cool yet firm. At this, Trent sneered. The polite facade instantly melted away. Separation? He spat the word. You must be joking. I hope you're not expecting me to agree to anything that compromises my financial future. Compromises his future? Typical Trent. Money and status were all that mattered to him. Certainly not family. I pressed on calmly. I'm talking about splitting things equitably between us. Surely we can be reasonable adults. Trent pounded his fist on the table, rattling the coffee mugs and startling patrons at other tables. No, Eliza, I will not agree to walk away empty-handed. Not after wasting the prime of my career on this lackluster marriage, he jabbed bitterly. You will sign over your inheritance, or I'll make you regret ever threatening this divorce. And there it was, no pretense anymore about preserving our family or saving our marriage. Trent laid bare his singular goal, getting his greedy hands on what he felt he deserved. Behind his macho threats, though, I detected desperation. His future fortune and reputation were at stake if he couldn't manipulate me into conceding. This time he underestimated my resolve. I kept my tone measured. Are you quite finished with your tirade? Because nothing you say will coerce me into just handing everything over. I'm fully prepared for a legal battle. Trent's face reddened, his temper rising. But I recognized the flash of fear behind his harsh glare. My stoic confidence had caught him off guard. You entitled, washed-up loser, he sputtered. I made you everything you have, and this is the thanks I get? You'll regret this, Eliza. No one steals my future. With that, Trent shoved his chair back forcefully, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out, steaming. My hands were trembling again, though this time with relief and triumph. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, to stop the recording. Not only did I hold firm in my refusal to cave to his threats, I now had them all on tape. No more hiding behind a charming veneer. The world would soon hear Trent's true venomous nature. For the first time in months, I broke into a grin. My tormentor's downfall was imminent. With Claire masterfully pulling legal strings and karma beginning to strike back at Trent for his deceit, I had set the stage for his reckoning. I almost pitied the poor guy if he wasn't such a loathsome snake, willing to crush his own family for personal gain. Oh well, no mercy for the selfish fool. After settling my bill, I strode confidently out the door towards a future that shined brighter by the minute. My resolve was steeled for the fight ahead. Trent would bitterly regret the day he crossed me. I sighed, seeing the caller ID flash Trent for the third time that morning. After ignoring his barrage of petty texts, he was apparently resorting to voice messages to vent his frustration. My finger hovered over the decline button when a thought struck me. Trent's behavior had become increasingly erratic and abusive. Building a record of evidence couldn't hurt for the looming legal battle. I answered coolly, "What do you need, Trent?" His voice came through the speaker shrill and commanding. "We need to discuss funeral arrangements for your mother. I already contacted my preferred venue and caterer and put a deposit down. I figured you'd be too emotional to handle planning." My breath caught in my throat. The audacity, after months of dismissing my grief, now assuming control and decision-making because I was too hysterical? I managed a terse response. "Actually, Trent, I've already made arrangements with Mom's church, and her closest friends are helping coordinate everything. But I'm sure your caterer refunds deposits if you ask nicely." I couldn't help the subtle jab, indicating his presumptuous planning was not required or appreciated. An exasperated sigh followed by a lengthy pause echoed from the phone. When Trent spoke again, any veil of compassion had vanished, revealing biting contempt. "You always were helpless when it came to executive decisions. I don't know why I'm surprised you'd leave the planning to a bunch of old church biddies barely clinging to life themselves." I clenched my phone tightly, holding back a spew of enraged curses. "Breathe, Eliza." His cruelty, shocking as it may sound on tape, could be critical evidence if he tried claiming I was the bitter, unreasonable one later. I responded evenly. "I'm organizing this funeral in alignment with Mom's wishes, something you never bothered to learn in 25 years together. She will be honored respectfully. Please just let me handle this, Trent." Another tense pause followed. For a moment I thought he may have hung up. Then came a chilling, clipped reply. "Fine, Eliza. Throw your quaint little funeral tea party." but don't expect me to stand around making small talk with those religious fanatics, and not a penny extra from my accounts." The line clicked dead. I released a shuddering breath and collapsed onto our bed, which Trent had strategically left stripped of all bedding. Even in death, he continued finding new psychological torture methods. Over the next days, his cruelty only crescendoed. As I sorted through Mom's belongings with supportive friends, he ridiculed the task as feeble sentimentality. When our son Lucas came to help with cleaning, Trent's calm facade broke. "Don't you have exams to be focusing on instead of wasting time on redundant housework?" he had berated our stunned son. All this could have simply been hauled off to Goodwill instead of drama queen Eliza's tedious emotional purge. Lucas retreated from the house quickly after that, clearly pained by his father's escalating bitterness. My heart broke envisioning the distance growing between Trent and the children. He was willing to sever even these bonds in his rabid pursuit of assets and pride. The day of Mom's funeral arrived, gray and weary, mimicking my turbulent mindset. As I dressed in a simple black gown, Trent emerged shirtless, sipping his morning beer. His appearance mirrored the disregard he had shown Mom even while alive. "Give my well wishes to the brainwashed Bible Brigade," he offered snidely. Hot tears stung behind my eyes. I slipped silently out the door into the drizzling rain. The showers disguised streaming tears as I drove to the church. Surrounded by true loved ones there, the service was filled with tender moments, honoring Mom's generous soul. Trent's absence went largely unnoticed. While it pained me he had abandoned us at this sacred time, Trent's recurring callous treatment solidified my will. Any lingering hesitation to push forward on severing ties vanished. His efforts to intimidate me into obedience had only affirmed suspicions of abuse for years. Now, with clear-cut proof, I was determined to fight back legally. As we laid Mom's rose-adorned casket to rest beside Dad, the rain subsided, leaving glimmering puddles in the cemetery grass. The clouds parted, revealing hints of hopeful blue skies beyond life's storms. Gazing into the light, I knew Mom and Dad were cheering me on proudly, and Trent's reckoning awaited on the horizon. Sitting across from Claire, reviewing the latest legal documents, I finally felt empowered and in control. Though Trent continued his petty power moves, I now had the law on my side. "With the testimony and evidence you've provided, we've compiled an ironclad case," Claire assured me, gathering up papers into a leather folio. Her fiery confidence fueled my own. "I'm certain the judge will rule in your favor regarding financial separation, and with documented proof of emotional abuse, you'll easily be granted full custody of your children." A wave of relief washed over me at this prospect. Securing Lucas and Sophie's well-being through the volatile divorce was my priority. Trent's influence had become downright toxic. Protecting them legally would provide peace of mind. "You've worked wonders, Claire," I offered sincerely. "I honestly don't know if I could have come out on top in this fight without you navigating the complex legal channels." Claire smiled humbly, handing me copies of the documents. "I'm happy to play my part, but truly, Eliza, your courage and refusal to be intimidated is what's winning the day here. Don't forget that inner strength." Her words resonated with my core. For so long I had minimized my resilience, believing Trent was the trailblazer. Now clarity revealed I was the foundation holding everything together behind the scenes, and I deserved equitable compensation for my sacrifices. Buoyed by this insight, I practically floated out the law office doors, ready to embrace the next phase with renewed moxie. My steps halted abruptly when I spotted Trent leaning smugly against my Subaru's driver's side door, preventing my entry. "Here we go again." "Well, isn't this cozy?" he offered sarcastically, gesturing to the law office. "Nothing like conspiring with shady lawyers instead of trying to salvage our sacred marriage vows." I scoffed at this warped perspective. I hardly think a healthy marriage involves one partner selfishly demanding assets and demolishing property without consent. "Now please move. You're blocking my car." Trent stepped defiantly in front of the handle as I reached to open it. His height had always given him an intimidation advantage. I refused to cower this time. "Not until you agree to a mediation session with a counselor," Trent demanded. "I'm sure once you explain yours fairly to an expert, they will set you straight about what you are entitled or not to." I nearly gagged at this attempt to silence me by making my protests seem irrational and uninformed. I glared directly at him with emboldened confidence. I know precisely what I'm entitled to, Trent, and I have an extensive, well-documented legal team securing it without manipulation. You will not cheat me out of my due compensation. His smug veneer flickered briefly with doubt. My audacity clearly hit a nerve. Regaining composure, Trent pressed closer, his stale coffee breath assaulting my senses. Careful, Eliza. You seem to have forgotten who ensured you lived so well all this time. Threaten my reputation and I'll reduce you to dirt. Though his words raised the hairs on my arms, I didn't flinch. We stood face to face in taut silence, twins titans at the peak of a perilous precipice. I broke the tension calmly. Feel free to sling threats if it makes you feel powerful, Trent. But we both know you stand to lose far more than I do here. With strength belying my trembling core, I peered unwavering into his dark eyes. Now for the last time, get away from my vehicle. You no longer dictate my life. A charged beat passed where anything could have transpired. To my relief, Trent scowled bitterly, then stepped aside, grumbling. I maintained vigilant composure despite quaking inside, safely driving off without glancing back. Maintaining courage through intimidation tactics was not easy, but I realized the breadth of my fortitude, and nothing was stronger than a determined woman protecting her interests against a greedy bully. Game on, Trent. Your reckoning awaits. I tapped my foot impatiently, glancing between my watch and the imposing courthouse doors. Claire and I had filed the paperwork, petitioning for financial separation over a month ago, and the court date had finally arrived. Yet despite the early hour, Trent was characteristically late, no doubt a feeble attempt to regain control by making me wait anxiously. Little did he know, I had reached a state of zen. The law was on my side. 15 tedious minutes later, Trent came swaggering up the marble steps, not a hair out of place in his arrogantly confident power suit. I offered a cordial smile. Nice of you make an appearance, Trent. Shall we proceed? He bristled at my unruffled demeanor, but nodded curtly. I led the way into the expansive courtroom as we took our respective places at the defendants' tables. Claire entered soon after, flanked by our other legal aides, nodding reassurance. I kept my breath steady, visualizing victory as the bailiff called court into session. This was it, Judgment Day, for Trent's deceit. The proceedings commenced efficiently, with Claire masterfully presenting our evidence of emotional abuse and financial coercion. The judge listened solemnly, eyes widening at particularly shocking voicemails from Trent maligning my character. I had to hand it to Claire. She had crafted an utterly unimpeachable case. After what seemed an eternity, the judge cleared her throat, peering sternly over spectacles. In light of the comprehensive evidence provided, I hereby grant the petition for dissolution of shared finances. All assets and inheritance shall remain exclusive property of Eliza, the plaintiff. I nearly collapsed with relief and triumph. Glancing to my right, I noticed Trent turning a shade of crimson I hadn't witnessed since Sophie's terrible twos tantrums. Veins bulged from his neck as he sputtered incoherently, trying to interject. The gavel pounded authoritatively, silencing him. Sweet victory. Additionally, in consideration of documented mental abuse, I'm granting Eliza full legal and physical custody of both minor children, the judge continued firmly. At this, Trent slammed his fists furiously on the tabletop, sending pens flying wildly. This is outrageous, he roared, spit flying. That money is rightfully mine, and you can't take my kids, Eliza. Before the bailiff could react, Trent sent the defendant's table crashing onto its side with a violent shove. He fixed his crazed eyes on me, shouting accusations as security restrained him. Rather than engage, I simply gathered my belongings calmly as he was dragged out, kicking and screaming. You've made a grave mistake, he hollered among straining security guards. I'll take back what's mine, Eliza. This isn't over. His lasting threats echoed down the marbled hall as I strode out to meet Claire with a confident smile. Congratulations, Eliza, Claire grinned as we stepped into sunshine beyond the imposing columns. You are now a very wealthy, single woman, and Trent's hysterics surely didn't help his appeal to the judge. Well done maintaining composure. I let out a deep exhale, feeling years of anxiety and oppression lifting away. Thank you sincerely. I couldn't have navigated this without your counsel. In more ways than one, I chuckled. We exchanged relieved embraces before Claire headed off to handle newly freed-up caseload. Meanwhile, I slid into my Subaru's driver's seat, finally feeling its true owner. Trent's desperate threats didn't faze my cooler state of mind. His burst of outrage proved powerless against the justice system, securing my rights irrevocably. Any sway he once held over me was crushed under the mighty gavel of truth. I turned the ignition key, feeling renewed energy course through the previously strained vehicle. Trent had monopolized the driver's seat of my life for too long. But with his recklessly controlling hands finally off the wheel, I cruised eagerly onward down the open road toward independence. "Mom, that creme brulee was amazing!" Lucas grinned, leaning back contentedly after our celebratory dinner at the upscale French bistro. "We definitely have to come back here." I smiled at my son, who was home on a short break before summer internships ramped up. With Trent temporarily absent from family life, the cloud of tension had lifted. Sophie squeezed my hand affectionately from across the table. "I'm so proud of you for standing up to Dad, Mom. You deserved that win in court," she offered sincerely. I swelled with gratitude to have my children close again without fear of callous comments shattering tender moments. As we strolled outside the restaurant, Lucas suddenly gripped my arm, nodding towards the bar next door. There sat Trent, half-slumped on a stool, staring numbly at CNN, blaring predictions for an upcoming economic recession. Even from a distance, his unkempt appearance revealed a broken man. I felt Sophie's hand tense on my shoulder. "Let's go, Mom," she urged gently. I paused, taking in the scene of my once formidable opponent, diminished to a drunken shell of spite. His legacy and reputation apparently lay in shambles, much like the remains of our demolished home. Investors and elite executives had shunned him after his court outburst made salacious headlines. Rumor was his assets had taken a significant hit in the latest stock market plunge as well. The community backlash only amplified his downfall. "Karma's a beast, eh, Trent?" Lucas muttered. Seeing his disheveled father still sparked sadness behind the resentment in Lucas's eyes. Sophie linked her arm through his comfortingly as they walked ahead to gather an Uber. I stood frozen, gazing upon the aftermath of Trent's greed and hubris. Claire was right. He had far more to lose than me by refusing to compromise. Now every manipulative scheme and sociopathic threat had come crashing down in a brutal reckoning. Hard times humbled even the proudest titans. Though my righteous anger towards Trent persisted, witnessing his self-destruction awakened traces of pity amongst the bitterness. Perhaps if he demonstrated true remorse and sought help for underlying issues driving his egocentric worldview. My sympathetic pondering was cut short when Trent glanced up blearily from his drink. His bloodshot eyes registered rage seeing me. He rose unsteadily and staggered over, wearing a twisted smirk. "Come to gloat, have you?" He slurred, whiskey breath assaulting my senses. "Little Miss Righteous Victor." Trent wobbled, but spite sharpened his words. I stood calmly, meeting his hollow glare. "No, Trent, just heading home after dinner with our kids, actually. I do hope you'll get the help you need." Before I could finish, Trent erupted in a spit-flying diatribe. "Save your sanctimonious talk. This is your fault, Eliza. Your petty comeuppance threats me destitute and despised." He swayed aggressively closer. "I lost everything because of your self-centered vengeance." Sensing the confrontation escalating, I stepped cautiously back, gesturing to the approaching bartender for assistance. Trent was clearly beyond logical exchange in his inebriated rage. His unhinged tirade continued, attracting shocked attention from passers-by. "Mark my words, Eliza. I will get even. Your little celebratory parade ends now." He lunged towards me as the bartender grabbed him. I retreated quickly to where Lucas and Sophie stood horrified. Police sirens wailed from down the street, responding to calls about the disturbance. "Let's go home," I urged, ushering my shaken children away from the nightmarish scene. Glancing back, I glimpsed Trent being shoved into a squad car, drunkenly raging about comeuppance as they sped away. The vengeance Trent had poisonously plotted was now his own ruin, woven by greed. And despite his threats, watching him fade, unhinged and unwell in flashing police lights, I pitied more than feared the broken, bitter man. A year had passed since that tumultuous night, witnessing Trent unravel completely. His drunken threats persisted for months between jail sentences and court-ordered rehab sessions. But word was he had finally accepted a lenient sentence at an upstate center specializing in anger issues and financial disorders. With Trent's toxicity no longer poisoning my home space, I began envisioning how to rebuild, starting with restoring the literal foundation he had callously crushed. On a refreshingly mild Saturday morning, I stood smiling with Lucas and Sophie on the vacant lot where our family home once stood sturdy for decades. Claire snapped photos capturing the hopeful moment as we broke ground to construct a new dwelling, not haunted by residual darkness. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Sophie repeated, squeezing my shoulder. "This is a fresh start for all of us." I surveyed the space, buzzing with construction crews hauling lumber, while Lucas and I discussed potential layouts. Trent's devastating demolishment had crushed more than bricks and mortar. But rising resilient from the rubble, I would forge new sanctuaries for my children, devoid of oppressive shadows. Over the next year, tangible rebuilding progressed in tandem with inner healing. With each golden beam raised and brick mortared in place, I sensed our spirits mending as well. Soon the lingering wounds from Trent's destruction would be more scar tissue than open gash. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I gathered with loved ones to celebrate the finished product, a gorgeous contemporary farmhouse blending vintage charm with sleek upgrades. Sophie and Lucas had invited college friends. Supportive relatives filled the home with infectious laughter. As caterers circulated with champagne to commemorate the occasion, I paused to admire photos adorning the fireplace mantel. Images of my parents smiled down, filled with eternal light and love despite their earthly absence. Gazing around at those present, additional missing faces stood out painfully. Trent's parents had shown their true colors, aligning firmly with their son despite incriminating evidence against him. And Trent himself sat stewing in isolation, still too prideful to take accountability. Their self-imposed misery was punishment enough. Occasional pangs of sadness resurfaced, missing the man Trent used to be before ambition consumed him. But focusing forward allowed me to appreciate life's everyday joys again, instead of dwelling on toxic relationships. Later, after guests had dispersed with hearty congratulations and housewarming bouquets, Sophie joined me on the front porch, gazing up at constellations glittering optimistically. She broke the pensive silence. "Dad sent me a brief letter today from the rehab center. It sounds like intensive counseling is helping him finally reflect more on the consequences of his actions." Though skeptical about authentic transformation from brief therapy, I nodded. "That's promising. Real change takes time, though." I hugged Sophie in closer. "But the most crucial relationships to fortify are right here with people committed to lifting us higher." Sophie smiled up brightly through tears glinting in the moonlight. In her strength and sensitivity, my greatest co-creation glowed. She would perpetuate cycles of compassion, not malice. Together we sat in meditative silence, connected to forces intricately crafting redemption from ruin. Though scars remained, Trent's corrosion had only illuminated my resilient spirit. His darkness merely fertilized future flowers determined to keep blooming.
I often find myself reflecting on how my life took such a drastic turn. It's a story I've shared with few, but it's my story, one marked by abandonment, heartache, and a quest for identity. My name is Grace Thompson, and this is how my journey began. I was 10 years old when everything changed. My father, Robert Thompson, had lost his job as an auto mechanic, and with it, our family's financial stability crumbled. My mother, Linda, worked part-time as a cashier, but her income wasn't enough to cover our needs. The mounting bills and debts soon became too much for us to handle. I remember those days vividly. My parents were tense and distant, and the arguments were frequent and harsh. One day, without much warning, my parents told me that I would be going to live with my grandparents in Nebraska. "It's just for a while," my mother assured me. "Things will get better, and we'll have you back with us soon." I wanted to believe them. I really did. I packed a few belongings and left our small, cramped apartment with a mixture of hope and confusion. I wasn't sure why things had gotten so bad, but I clung to the promise that it would be temporary. When I arrived at my grandparents' small farm in rural Nebraska, the reality of my situation hit me hard. The farm was miles from the nearest town, isolated and quiet. My grandparents, in their 70s, greeted me with a forced cheerfulness that felt hollow. They were good people, but they were old and set in their ways. They tried to make me feel welcome, but their warmth did little to ease the coldness I felt inside. The months turned into years. Each day was a reminder of my parents' broken promise. I sent letters and tried calling, but my attempts were met with silence. The only response I ever received was a vague postcard now and then, saying that things were still tough and that they were working on it. The hardest part was feeling abandoned. My grandparents were kind enough, but their support was limited. They were busy with their daily routines and the demands of the farm. I felt like an afterthought, a burden they were forced to bear. They didn't know how to comfort me, and I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. The pain of being left behind festered in me, and I grew increasingly withdrawn. My loneliness grew deeper when I learned that my younger brother, Max, had been born after I left. I was told he was a bright, cheerful child who brought joy to my parents' lives. The news only deepened my sense of betrayal. Here was this new part of my family, growing up with my parents, while I was left alone, far away. Then came a turning point that shattered my remaining illusions. I was about 15 when I overheard a conversation between my grandmother and my mother on the phone. I had been trying to eavesdrop to catch any news from my parents, and what I heard made my heart sink. My mother was still alive, and she had been in contact with my grandmother all along. The realization was a gut punch. My parents hadn't been completely out of reach. They had chosen to keep me at a distance. That discovery was the catalyst for my decision to confront my past. I was determined to find out why my parents had abandoned me and why they hadn't tried to reconnect. But my search for answers was met with obstacles. My grandparents were tight-lipped, and any questions I asked only resulted in vague responses or more silence. When I turned 13, my Aunt Helen came into the picture. She was my father's younger sister, and she lived in Denver, Colorado. I didn't know her well, but my grandparents decided that it was time for a change. I was sent to live with Aunt Helen, and though I was apprehensive, I hoped that this new chapter would bring some relief. Leaving Nebraska was both an escape and a new beginning. Aunt Helen met me at the bus station with a warm smile and open arms. She was kind, patient, and seemed genuinely interested in helping me rebuild my life. Despite my fears and reservations, I felt a glimmer of hope. The isolation of the farm, the endless waiting, and the pain of abandonment were behind me. At least, that's what I hoped. My life with Aunt Helen was a stark contrast to my time with my grandparents. She gave me the space to heal, to start over, and to envision a future for myself. It was clear from the start that she wanted to help me, and she showed me a level of care and understanding that I hadn't experienced in years. This new phase of my life was the beginning of a journey toward finding myself and understanding my place in the world. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Aunt Helen's presence marked the first real step toward healing from the wounds of my past. I wish I could say that moving to Denver with Aunt Helen solved all my problems, but life is rarely that simple. While it offered me a fresh start, the pain of my past and the longing for answers followed me, shadowing every step I took. Aunt Helen was wonderful. She made sure I felt welcome and cared for. Her home was a stark contrast to my grandparents' farm, bright, bustling, and filled with opportunities. Helen was a high school teacher, and her nurturing nature extended beyond the classroom. She listened to me, encouraged me, and became my emotional anchor. Her support was exactly what I needed as I navigated the tumultuous teenage years. I started high school in Denver, and while I struggled with the emotional scars from my past, I began to find solace in my studies. It was during this time that I discovered my passion for dentistry. The idea of helping people, of being able to make a difference in someone's life, resonated deeply with me. Aunt Helen encouraged me to pursue this path, and it gave me a sense of purpose. Despite my growing interest in dentistry, the absence of my biological parents loomed over me. My parents' silence was a constant reminder of the abandonment I had endured. Every birthday, every holiday spent without them was a painful reminder of the family I had lost. When I turned 18, I made the decision to legally change my last name to Thompson Hart, adopting Aunt Helen's last name. It felt like a necessary step to sever the painful ties to my biological family and to fully embrace the new life I was building. Aunt Helen was supportive of this decision, and it gave me a sense of closure. I was ready to move forward, focusing on my education and career aspirations. It was during my sophomore year in dental school that I overheard a conversation between Aunt Helen and my grandmother. I had been visiting my aunt's home during a break from school, and I was curious about a phone call Aunt Helen had taken in the kitchen. I had a bad habit of eavesdropping, but I was desperate for any information about my parents. From where I stood, I could hear Aunt Helen speaking softly to my grandmother. "You know, Grace overheard that conversation," Aunt Helen said, her voice tinged with concern. "She's still hurt by everything. I don't know how to explain this to her." The grandmother's voice, though distant, was unmistakably my mother's. My heart pounded as I strained to hear more. "I know, Helen," my mother said, "but we didn't want to upset her. We thought it was better this way." The revelation was staggering. My mother was alive. All those years of believing she had vanished were shattered by the realization that she had been in contact with my grandmother. The betrayal cut deep. If she was still in touch, why hadn't she tried to reach out to me? Why had she allowed me to believe she was gone? My emotions were a whirlwind. I felt anger, confusion, and an overwhelming need for answers. That night, I confronted Aunt Helen. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did my mother let me believe she was dead? I need to understand what happened." Aunt Helen took a deep breath and looked at me with a mix of sympathy and sadness. "Grace, I didn't want to hurt you further. Your mother and father made some choices that were beyond my control. They felt that leaving you behind was the only way they could manage their situation. They thought it would be temporary, but things didn't go as planned." Her words did little to soothe the storm inside me. I felt as if my world had been turned upside down once again. I needed to know more, to confront my parents and hear their side of the story. But Aunt Helen's words also made me realize that finding answers might not be as straightforward as I had hoped. In the months that followed, I continued to focus on my studies, using them as a distraction from the turmoil within. I knew I had to confront my past, but the process was slow and fraught with uncertainty. The pain of being abandoned, the confusion of my parents' reappearance, and the quest for my own identity were all part of the tangled web I had to navigate. Though my heart was heavy with unanswered questions, Aunt Helen remained a steady source of support. She guided me through the emotional turbulence, helping me focus on my future. But the unresolved issues with my parents loomed large, casting a long shadow over my journey. The day I had dreaded for years finally arrived. It was a chilly morning in early autumn when my estranged family reappeared in my life, right when I was settling into my routine at the dental clinic. Denver's crisp air seemed to mirror the cold reality I was about to face. It started with a letter. I was sitting in my small apartment, going over patient records, when I noticed an envelope with my parents' return address. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, the contents sending a chill down my spine. The letter demanded that I provide financial support for them and my younger brother, Max, now 6 years old. They threatened legal action if I refused. The words on the paper seemed to mock the years of silence and the pain I had endured. I stared at the letter, a mixture of disbelief and anger swirling within me. How could they have the audacity to demand anything from me after all these years? After everything they had done, they had the nerve to come back into my life and expect me to help them? The betrayal was unbearable. I took the letter to Aunt Helen, feeling a surge of frustration and confusion. We sat at the kitchen table, the room feeling unusually cold despite the warm autumn sunlight streaming through the window. Aunt Helen's face was a mask of concern as she read the letter. "Oh, Grace," she said softly, handing the letter back to me. "This is awful. I'm so sorry you have to go through this." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. They just waltz back into my life and think they can demand money? What gives them the right? They abandoned me. They left me to fend for myself. And now they want something from me? Aunt Helen nodded sympathetically. "I know it's hard, but you need to be careful. They might try to use the situation to manipulate you. You should consider seeking legal advice. Taking her advice to heart, I consulted with a lawyer. The legal process was daunting, but I was determined to fight back. My lawyer assured me that I had no legal obligation to provide financial support, and if they pursued legal action, we could counter with claims of their abandonment and neglect. I felt a small measure of relief knowing that I had some legal ground to stand on. But the legal battle was only part of the ordeal. My parents' reappearance triggered a wave of emotional turmoil. I was grappling with feelings of betrayal and anger. My parents, Robert and Linda, had seemingly forgotten the years of pain they had caused, and their sudden intrusion into my life was like a cruel joke. One evening, as I was leaving the clinic, I encountered Emily Foster, my sister-in-law. Her presence was unexpected and unwelcome. She had always been known for her childish behavior, but this time, her demeanor was particularly aggressive. "Grace, you're making a big mistake," Emily said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're letting your bitterness drive you away from your family. They need your help, and you're being selfish." Her words were like a slap in the face. I was taken aback by her audacity. Selfish? After everything they've done to me? You have no idea what it's been like. I'm not going to let them use me again. Emily's face twisted in anger. You don't understand. They're struggling, and you're just going to turn your back on them? I tried to remain calm, but the encounter left me shaken. Emily's interference was just another complication in an already complex situation. The emotional strain was growing heavier with each passing day. Determined to regain control, I focused on preparing my response to the legal threat from my parents. I gathered all the documents and evidence of their abandonment, making sure to present a clear case. The process was exhausting, but it was necessary to protect myself from their demands. As I navigated the legal challenges, Aunt Helen was my rock. She provided a comforting presence, offering encouragement and practical support. We spent countless hours reviewing documents and strategizing our next steps. The legal confrontation, however, was only the beginning of a long and grueling process. My parents' attempts to pressure me continued, and the emotional scars of abandonment resurfaced. I was forced to confront the reality that my past was not something I could easily escape. Despite the turmoil, I remained resolute. I refused to let my parents' demands control my life. I continued to focus on my career and my well-being, determined to emerge from this ordeal stronger and more independent. The fight for my own sense of closure and justice was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The process of healing and self-discovery was ongoing, and as I moved forward, I hoped to find peace and reclaim my sense of identity from the shadows of my past. As the final days of the legal proceedings approached, the weight of my past seemed almost unbearable. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the constant turmoil, but I was also determined to close this chapter of my life on my own terms. Denver was bustling around me, but my world felt like it had come to a standstill. The confrontation in court was intense. My parents' demands had been clear. They wanted financial support and were threatening legal action if I didn't comply. But my lawyer and I were prepared. We presented a compelling case, backed by the documents and evidence of their abandonment. It was clear to the court that their sudden reappearance was not a genuine attempt to reconnect, but rather a calculated move to gain financial support. In the courtroom, I faced them for the first time in years. My father, Robert, looked older and more defeated than I remembered, while my mother, Linda, had a resigned expression. The sight of them was unsettling. It brought back all the pain and confusion of my childhood. But this time, I was not the vulnerable little girl who had been left behind. I was an adult, a professional, and I had the strength to stand up for myself. The judge's ruling was a significant victory. I was legally absolved of any financial obligation to my parents. Their attempts to manipulate and control me through the threat of legal action had failed. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a profound sense of relief and liberation. The chapter was finally closing, and I could start focusing on my future. However, the resolution of the legal battle didn't completely erase the emotional scars. The process had dredged up old feelings of abandonment and rejection, and it took time to heal. I found solace in the support of Aunt Helen, whose unwavering love and encouragement had been my anchor throughout this turbulent period. One of the most difficult parts of moving on was dealing with Emily Foster, my sister-in-law. Her attempt to sabotage my life had reached a peak during a baby shower that was meant to be a celebration. She had caused a scene, making false accusations that led to a rift in the family. The fallout was messy, and it strained my relationship with the rest of the family. But even in the midst of this drama, Aunt Helen stood by me. She helped me navigate the situation, offering both emotional and practical support. We decided it was best to cut ties with Emily and distance ourselves from the chaos she created. It was a hard decision, but it was necessary for my own well-being. With the turmoil behind me, I began focusing on my life and my career. The dental clinic in Denver was my sanctuary. I poured my energy into my work, finding satisfaction and purpose in helping my patients. It was a stark contrast to the pain of the past, and it offered me a sense of normalcy and fulfillment. Gradually, I began to rebuild my life. The emotional wounds from my past were healing, and I started to embrace a future where I could focus on my career and personal happiness. The support of Aunt Helen was a constant reminder that I was not alone. Her love had become my foundation, and I cherished the bond we had formed. I also began to understand the importance of self-worth and independence. The ordeal with my family had taught me valuable lessons about resilience and the strength it takes to stand up for oneself. I had learned to trust my instincts and make decisions that were in my best interest. As I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been arduous, but it had led me to a place of self-discovery and growth. I was no longer defined by my past or the mistakes of my family. I was forging my own path, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. In the end, the story of my life was one of overcoming adversity and finding strength in the face of betrayal. My quest for identity and belonging had led me to a place of self-acceptance and independence. The trials of the past had shaped me, but they no longer held me captive. I was ready to embrace the future, with the knowledge that I had the power to shape my own destiny.
You should have handed over control when Dad passed. Brielle's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. This is our chance to sell and make a real profit. My heart stuttered as I peered around the corner, spotting my cousin deep in conversation with Ethan, my fiancé of 3 years. They huddled near the bar, oblivious to my eavesdropping presence at our winery's annual harvest party. I'm in, Ethan murmured with a solemn nod. We'll tell Avery after securing the deal. She won't be able to refuse once the money's on the table. Bile rose in my throat as the truth slammed into me. My own family, my supposed loved ones, plotting to steal away my father's life's work, everything I'd sacrificed to preserve. Trembling, I stormed away, desperate for space to process the gut-wrenching betrayal. Tears blurred my vision as I fled through the vineyard's rows, the muffled sounds of celebration fading behind me. How could they? After all the blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into this place, into keeping Dad's dream alive. And Ethan? The man I'd planned to marry, willing to strip me of my legacy for profit. The vines stretched endlessly in every direction, mirroring the tangled maze of shock and rage clawing at my chest. I stumbled forward, uncaring of the twigs snagging my dress or the chill night air whipping across my face. It wasn't until I reached the secluded corner where Dad's favorite rosebush grew that I finally crumpled to the ground in anguished sobs. The petals glistened with dew, oblivious to my shattering world. After several ragged breaths, determination replaced despair. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Not while a single drop of my father's spirit flowed through these vines. If Ethan and Brielle wanted a war for the winery's soul, they'd soon discover I possessed more mettle than they could ever fathom. Fueled by righteous fury, I rose and marched with renewed purpose back toward the celebration. Ethan and Brielle would never see the tempest brewing behind my controlled smile as I rejoined the crowd. Let them bask in their misguided confidence. It would make their downfall all the more catastrophic. I was the master of this vineyard, and by night's end, I'd have the perfect scheme to protect Dad's legacy at all costs. In the days following the harvest party, I played the role of the oblivious fiancé to perfection. Ethan remained affectionate, his gentle kisses and soft caresses mere rehearsed performances masking his deceit. "How was your meeting with the marketing team?" he asked over dinner one evening, his hazel eyes betraying not a glimmer of guilt. I forced a smile. "Productive. We've got some exciting new campaigns in the works." Ethan nodded, shoveling a forkful of pasta into his mouth. "That's great, babe. I know how hard you've been working to take the winery to new heights." The blatant hypocrisy nearly made me gag. While he spouted meaningless platitudes, I secretly gathered evidence, piecing together the full extent of his treachery with Brielle. Tapping into the winery's financial records and encrypted communications, I discovered their embezzlement stretched back months, funds they'd been funneling into an offshore account. Printouts detailing dozens of wire transfers lay scattered across my office desk like damning puzzle pieces. My blood boiled as I connected their illicit money trail to meetings with corporate bigwigs, vultures eager to devour my family's legacy. "You lying, grasping snakes," I seethed through gritted teeth. The office door creaked open, and Lucia, my most trusted employee, stepped in with a concerned frown. "Everything okay, Miss Connors?" I waved her inside and gestured to the documents. "See for yourself. My dear fiancé and cousin have been stabbing us in the back for months, setting up a sale to that blood-sucking conglomerate we've been fighting off." Lucia's eyes widened in horror as she scanned the records. "Those maneuvers, how could they?" "Greed and self-preservation," I spat. "Ethan's likely counting on making me the rank-and-file winery bitch once the deal is done." I slammed my fist on the desk, delighting in Lucia's startled flinch. "But they're gravely mistaken if they think I'll roll over without bringing the entire facade crumbling down on their heads." Lucia swallowed hard, her voice wavering. "What are you going to do?" A wicked grin stretched across my face as the seeds of vengeance took root. "I'm going to remind them why you don't dispense with honor among thieves." The next morning, I strode into Marcia Blackwood's prestigious law office, evidence folder in hand. If anyone could help dismantle Ethan and Brielle's underhanded scheme, it was Marcia, a brilliant legal shark with a reputation for devouring corporate sleazeballs. "Miss Connors," her assistant ushered me inside. "Miss Blackwood is expecting you." I found the renowned attorney studying a stack of documents behind her imposing mahogany desk. Razor-sharp eyes scrutinized me over the rim of her glasses as I approached. "You certainly have a flair for dramatic entrances," Marcia said dryly. "I hope, for your sake, you've brought me something substantial." Wordlessly, I handed over the folder and waited as she flipped through the incriminating paperwork. Bank statements, encrypted emails, everything I'd compiled on the betrayal. Marcia's practiced mask of stoicism slipped, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. "This is unbelievable. Your own family conspiring against you in broad daylight." I stifled the urge to snap. Try having that realization slap you across the face. Instead, I simply nodded. "Can you help me take them down?" My voice remained steady, devoid of the raging storm churning beneath my composed exterior. "I want to bury Ethan and Brielle under the full weight of legal and public retribution." A predatory glint flickered in Marcia's eyes, the look of a tiger scenting blood on the wind. "Oh, I'll do more than that, Miss Connors. By the time we're through, their reputations and freedom will be torn asunder. They'll be left destitute, forced to slink away from this valley with their tails between their legs." My lips curved into a vindictive smile, already envisioning the devastation I'd rain down upon the traitorous snakes slithering in my midst. Over the ensuing days, Marcia and I constructed an impenetrable counteroffensive, rallying allies in preparation to obliterate Ethan and Brielle's scheme. Anthony, my winery's head vintner, eagerly supplied information to undermine their corporate dealings. Jackson, our top sales rep, helped divert funds and reroute profitable distribution contracts. Kara in marketing launched a campaign showcasing our heritage and community ties, the very soul they aimed to ravage for profit. With each Ailey recruited and asset secured, the day of reckoning crept inexorably closer. Ethan and Brielle carried on clueless, their arrogance blinding them to the crumbling ground beneath their feet. I could hardly wait to cement the trapdoor's collapse and revel in their pathetic, well-deserved downfall. The first strike hit with precise, surgical brutality. This just in. Financial records have surfaced exposing embezzlement and corporate fraud at Connor Family Vineyards, the local news anchor announced in a grave tone. Sources indicate Chief Marketing Officer Ethan Baxter and Deputy Manager Brielle Evans have been funneling company assets into overseas accounts for personal gain. I watched with wicked satisfaction as the damning report flashed on the TV, my finger hovering over the pause button. Frozen on screen, Ethan and Brielle's faces contorted in horror. A perfect captured memory. In the ensuing days, a merciless barrage of legal filings and media leaks descended upon the conspirators. Marcia worked tirelessly, slapping them with criminal charges while ensuring every salacious allegation dominated headlines. Ethan confronted me in a heated parking lot showdown, his usually polished veneer cracked and disheveled. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded through clenched teeth, eyes wild and desperate. "We were going to set you up with a nice payoff, more than enough to retire comfortably." I laughed in his face, loud and mocking. "And let you thieves bleed my father's legacy dry? Spend his life's work on foosball tables and degenerate thrill-seeking?" The venom in my tone seemed to shrink him before my very eyes. "You deluded yourself into thinking I'd just hand over the keys and walk away once the money hit my account, that I'd forsake my responsibilities, my duties as Connor heir." Poking his chest with each enunciated word, I leaned until our faces were mere inches apart. "You, community anchor, the embodiment of Napa's proud heritage they'd never uproot without a customer backlash. All its posturing about market share and consolidation swiftly crumbled in the face of such toxic optics. Other potential investors fled like scattering roaches in the light, terrified of being labeled corporate pillagers. With their options dwindling, Ethan and Brielle found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn, each frantic move, born of arrogance and desperation, easily anticipated and deflected. Soon they'd have nowhere left to squirm except directly into the pit of consequences I'd meticulously excavated. I could already envision them dangling on the precipice, one fateful shove from total disgrace and ruin. With Ethan and Brielle's scheme to sell the winery lying in ruins, it was time to set the final stage for my grand defiance. I'd lured the snakes into a corner, now to spring the trap and crush them beneath my heel once and for all. The annual Winemakers Charity Gala presented the perfect opportunity. A high-profile event with investors, media, and industry bigwigs from across the valley in attendance. Precisely the backdrop I needed to thoroughly humiliate the treacherous fools threatening my legacy. "You wanted to speak with me?" Ethan sidled up beside me, his expression a pathetic mask of defeat and confusion. Behind him, Brielle hovered nearby, shoulders slumped in dejected resignation. I regarded them both with callous appraisal. "Yes, there's an important matter we need to discuss at the gala tonight, a major announcement regarding the winery's future." Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed my words. "You mean?" "Exactly." I allowed a calculated pause, lips curving into a razor-thin smile. "I think it's time I abdicated control and allowed the next generation to steer Connor Vineyards forward, with all our supporters present to bear witness." His features slackened in apparent relief, and I had to stifle a derisive snort. If only he knew the profound depths of his delusion. I don't know what to say," he stammered out. "Thank you for finally seeing reason, Avery. I promise Brielle and I will make you proud with the new direction." "Save your platitudes." I cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Just be prepared to embrace your role on the stage tonight. It'll be a performance neither of you will ever forget." As the gala commenced a few hours later, tension simmered just beneath the celebratory surface. Ethan and Brielle worked the crowds with artificial cheer, confidence buoyed by hubris and ignorance. They fully expected this evening to mark their ascension as winery overloads, a private victory party attended by the entire valley's elite. Little did the self-deluded fools realize the event heralded loss-doomed downfall, orchestrated by the very woman they sought to disenfranchise. Their humiliation would be gloriously public, a final legacy-staining trauma to complement the mountain of legal consequences still to come. Enjoying the evening? I sidled up to them with 2 fresh glasses of crisp Chardonnay, every inch the gracious hostess. Brielle accepted her drink, green eyes glinting with avarice. It's just the start of many more to come under our management. About that. I raised my glass in preparation for a toast. I believe I promised a special announcement tonight. Ethan's face broke into an eager grin, gobbling up the bait with reckless desperation. You finally saw the light. We're ready to lead the winery into a new prosperous era. Seizing the moment, I strode up onto the stage and seized the microphone, my voice amplifying across the hushed ballroom with authority. Esteemed guests, as many of you know, this gala celebrates not just the year's harvest, but the bonds of community, heritage, and family. I paused, letting the pregnant silence saturate the air like a heavy fog. Therefore, it is with great dismay I must reveal there are snakes in our midst. Pitching my voice to drip with disdain, I turned a piercing glare upon Ethan and Brielle's ashen faces. Snake who've been siphoning profits into offshore accounts and orchestrating an illegal sale to corporate raiders, all in a selfish ploy to steal what isn't theirs. The room erupted in shocked gasps and furious murmurs. Ethan gaped at me in abject horror, his knees visibly trembling. Score 1 for catching the rats by surprise. But take heart, my friends, I continued, allowing a vindicated smile. For I've spent months unraveling this scheme and constructed a righteous counterattack to preserve the heart and soul of Connor Vineyards. And as we speak, law enforcement is en route to apprehend the conspirators and abate this betrayal once and for all. That caused another thunderous roar to swell, this one of cheers and applause from the assembled guests. Ethan and Brielle could only stand frozen, their traitorous aspirations rejected in the most grandiose, humiliating forum imaginable. This was more than just the death of their scheme, it was the public immolation of their dreams, their reputations irrevocably stained for all to witness. Smile widening to bask in their torment, I locked eyes with Ethan, allowing my voice to rise above the raucous din in one final damning declaration. And so ends the inglorious paths of those foolish enough to betray Connor Family Vineyards. The silence that followed my declaration was electric, charged with 1,000 unvoiced gasps and accusations. Every eye in the gala burned into Ethan and Brielle, the snakes exposed in their traitorous coils. Clutching the microphone, I drank in the moment, savoring their abject humiliation as event security closed in to apprehend them. There would be no escape, no last-minute reprieve to salvage their crumbling reputations. "You lying bitch!" Brielle exploded first, always the blazing tempest to Ethan's simmering tumult. Flecks of spittle flew from her snarling lips as she wheeled on me in impotent rage. "How dare you? After everything our families sacrificed to build this place up from nothing." A cruel laugh burst from my chest, mocking and utterly devoid of mercy. "Sacrificed?" I echoed back at her venomous glare. "By stealing and scheming behind my back to rob me of my rightful inheritance? If that's the extent of your sacrifices, then allow me to return the favor." Sweeping an arm out, I gestured to the assembled crowd staring in scandalized fascination. "Esteemed guests, I give you Brielle Evans and Ethan Baxter, a contemptible pair of vipers who not only embezzled funds and orchestrated an illegal sale, but deluded themselves into thinking I'd simply hand over my legacy to their greedy clutches once the money hit my accounts." A fresh torrent of gasps and whispers rippled through the room, judgment and damnation raining down on the exposed snakes. No corner of this prestigious venue would offer them refuge, only the unforgiving glare of a community outraged by their insidious betrayal. "Well, here's your wake-up call." I locked eyes with the fuming Brielle, jaw clenched to savor her swift descent into panicked realization. "The Connors don't fold to snakes or sell our souls so easily. We have a pride and resilience that parasites like you could never comprehend." Dismissing her with a contemptuous sneer, I turned my scathing address toward the squirming Ethan. "And you, my so-called husband-to-be orchestrating a con to strip me of everything I've sacrificed for. Tell me, were you even attempting to mask your disloyalty, or just stringing me along like a blissfully ignorant puppet?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but any protest withered on his ashen lips beneath my blistering glare. "Save your platitudes, we both know the truth. You saw an opportunity for an easy payday. Damn whoever's lives or legacies got chewed up along the way." My fingers stabbed with each enunciated syllable, driving the humiliation deeper. "Well, you miscalculated badly, Baxter, and now you'll reap the widespread ruination you've disgraced yourselves by earning." As if on cue, the ballroom doors flew open, revealing a grim-faced Marcia Blackwood flanked by county sheriff's deputies, the legal cavalry arriving to compound the conspirators' devastation. They swept forward as twin tidal waves of dread finally crested over Ethan and Brielle's masks of feigned innocence. Excuses and justifications died on their lips, choked off by the stark ramifications crashing down upon their elaborately orchestrated scheme. Ethan turned to me, momentarily unmasked in his desperation. "Avery, please." But I cut him off with a contemptuous slash of my hand. "I don't know who you are anymore, Ethan. Only that you're just another snake unworthy of my name or legacy." His shoulders slumped just before the deputies seized his arms, the dual blows of exposure and consequence robbing him of any final defiance. Fighting back a cruel smirk of satisfaction, I handed off the microphone to the approaching Marcia and stood tall, basking in the complete conquest over those who dared imperil everything I held sacred. The sight of Ethan and Brielle being led away in shackles amid a chorus of infuriated shouts branded itself into my memory like a searing brand. A watershed moment, their pathetic hopes and conniving snuffed out, the battlefield belonging solely to the righteous victor once more. In the days following the gala, a torrential downpour of consequences deluged Ethan and Brielle's shattered world. The dominoes I'd meticulously lined up for months toppled in devastating, unrelenting succession. First came the media crucifixion, a full-court blitz of skating exposés that left no damning stone unturned. Embezzlement figures, paper trails of illicit deals, and every unsavory allegation flooded the airwaves and newspapers. Then, the corporate clients and investors rapidly distanced themselves from the toxic fallout. Distributors and joint ventures severed ties as if the conniving snakes had developed a virulent, untreatable plague. Lucrative contracts evaporated overnight, closing off any potential lifelines or escape routes. Within a week, the once burgeoning empire Ethan and Brielle envisioned lay smoldering on the funeral pyre of their treacherous designs. Watching the dominoes spiral from my winery office's floor-to-ceiling windows, I sipped a crisp Chardonnay, smoky undertones from the Heritage Vineyards crop complemented by the sweetness of hard-earned vindication. "It's all crumbling apart for them out there," Lucia murmured, mirroring my hawkish gaze. "Just like you said it would." "Of course." I swirled the glass, observing the pale liquid's lazy eddies. "Snakes like Ethan and Brielle slither on instinct and impulse. They can't help reverting to their vile natures. Snakes need to be defanged and rendered harmless before they can contaminate the surrounding environment." Lucia's brow furrowed as she processed my detached analysis. "And you're just okay with doing that to your own cousin? Your ex-fiancé?" A wintry smirk tugged at the corners of my lips. "I am the master of this vineyard, Lucia. Those sorts of personal entanglements and sentiments are luxuries I cannot afford to entertain, not when the stakes are so monumental." Shaking her head slowly, she shifted her gaze back outside. "I don't know how you have the stomach for it. All this, coldly dismantling their lives." "It's not about vengeance or settling scores," I replied evenly. This was always about upholding the values and legacy my father imparented upon these vines. Some degradations simply cannot be allowed to take root. A brief lull stretched between us as the enormity of the situation resonated. After a few thoughtful sips, I broke the silence. "We're in the final throes now. Ethan and Brielle's reputations are decimated beyond repair, their underhanded ambitions rendered stillborn." My finger traced the path of a large truck pulling away from a nearby warehouse, the last dribbles being siphoned off their illicit overseas accounts and asset seizures. Soon, their ill-gotten windfalls will be returned to their rightful place, and they'll be left as they began, common graspers stripped of all influence and credibility. A grim smile etched across my features as I envisioned them reaping the whirlwind of their own making. No prison could confine them as completely as the reputations and futures they'd willingly immolated on the altar of greed and treachery. Every eye would forever gaze upon them and see only the parasites who betrayed family and legacy for a quick payday, irredeemable snakes expelled from their padded Eden into the wilderness of permanent societal exile. A more comprehensive immolation than anything I could have orchestrated by sheer force of will. It's the perfect karmic justice, I declared, clinking my glass against Lucia's in a muted toast. They'll never hold power or influence in this valley or respected circles ever again. As the crystal chimed, my gaze drifted over the sprawling vineyards, basking in the valley's reflected emerald glow. The spark of renewal and reinvigoration already gathered on the horizon, possibilities blossoming like a new bountiful harvest yet to be plucked. My family's righteous legacy endured, burnished anew while the snakes shriveled and expired, warnings to any who dared stake foolish claims against its roots. I would ensure the winery's spiritual heart stemmed strong and proud in the aftermath. This land and its fruits would continue upholding the honored Connor's name long after Ethan and Brielle faded from memory like the meaningless parasites they were. Order had been restored, karmic balance achieved with a ruthless, defensive precision. In the aftermath of Ethan and Brielle's disgrace, an unsettled quiet descended upon the vineyards, the calm before a new season of growth and rebirth took root. I stood alone amid the pruned vines, calloused fingers tracing the gnarled bark, as the first whispers of spring's rejuvenation danced on the crisp morning breeze. The heady, fertile scents served as a poignant reminder of the perpetual cycles governing our world. Decay always preceded new life flourishing from the fallow remnants. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply and permitted myself a faint, rueful smile. Ethan and Brielle were experiencing that harsh transition now, reaping the bitter harvest they'd sown through arrogance and betrayal. Once vitally connected to this sacred valley's lifeblood, they now found themselves permanently severed, withered husks left behind as the next evolution in Connor Vineyards progressed without them. You look entirely too philosophical for someone clutching pruning shears. Anthony's gruff voice shook me from my reverie. I cracked open one eye to find the cantankerous old vintner shuffling up beside me, shotgun slung over his shoulder in his usual curmudgeonly fashion. Just savoring the turning of seasons, I replied, nodding toward the replenished vines already studding with pale green buds, contemplating the cycles that govern all aspects of life. Anthony snorted, hawking a thick globule of phlegm into the pristine soil. If you're searching for some grand metaphor about your jackass ex-fiancé and money-grubbing cousin, you're barking up the wrong goddamn vineyard. I fought back a chuckle, recognizing Anthony's typical bluster. Not at all, I assured him, merely appreciating the moments of peace and clarity before we dive headlong into another demanding harvest. The brusque old man gave a grudging nod, squinting out over the sea of vibrant green shoots stretching toward the horizon. Well, at least you finally evicted those parasitic rats mucking about in the wine cellar, he growled. Spat enough dealing with aphids and mildew without vermin infestations threatening to strangle the whole operation. His crass wisdom struck an unexpected chord of sanguine appreciation within me. Somehow, Anthony's earthy pragmatism invoked the spirit of these lands more than any fragrant spring zephyr or poetic Renaissance musings could muster. Some legacies endured not through florid romanticisms, but by the hard-bitten determination to preserve their essence through every cycle of death and rebirth. Dad had that stubborn tenacity, and now, in the aftermath of my own battle to safeguard our proudest fruits, it seemed I had awoken to it as well. Nodding toward the distant winery complex peeking over the knolls, I voiced the conviction blossoming in my chest. I want to expand our attractions and hospitality ventures, I declared. Lavish new visitor experiences to take this place to even greater heights. Show the world we're not some quaint foothill boutique, but a leading cultural anchor as timeless as the grapes we cultivate. Anthony regarded me with one bushy-thing eyebrow arched. Mighty ambitious talk, Miss Connor. A cantankerous smirk tugged at the corner of his cracked lips. Hope you've got the grit to back it up once the snakes come slithering back. My fingers tightened around the pruning shear's worn wooden grip, drawing reassuring strength from its hewn permanence. I'm counting on it, I replied with a feral grin. The vines and soil have tasted treachery. They'll never allow anything besides the purest offerings to take nourishment again. Let the serpents bare their fangs, we'll simply lop off their skulls and continue flourishing as we were meant to. Anthony held my gaze for a long moment before unleashing a gravely chuckle that reverberated across the peaceful vineyard like a rollicking thunderclap. Well, I'll be damned, he sputtered between wheezing guffaws. "You've finally grown a nice pair of auteur Italian grapes, haven't you, girl?" My laughter joined his, the twin reverberations mingling and trilling through the awakening vines, harbingers of the revitalized spirit and enterprise taking root. As our mirth gradually subsided into a comfortable quiet, I gazed out over my family's verdant domain with a renewed sense of purpose igniting within. No longer would I merely aim to preserve these hallowed lands. That passive existence felt unbefittingly hollow in the wake of my trials. From the ashes of duplicity and desecration, a new, more ambitious path beckoned to be forged, one that would elevate Connor Vineyards to unprecedented glories and esteem its founder could scarcely have envisioned. But I sensed Dad's spirit smiling down upon the endeavor, regardless, for he would surely recognize the resilience and singular drive propelling his heir's ascent from turmoil to triumph. The snakes had been vanquished. Now it was time for the phoenix to stretch its wings and soar toward new promised harvests. "You cheated on me!" Declan's enraged words pierced the air like shrapnel, shredding the fabric of our once blissful family life. I recoiled, my mind spinning as I struggled to process the vicious accusation. "What are you talking about? I would never betray you," I cried out, my voice trembling with disbelief. Declan thrust a medical report in my face, his eyes blazing with hurt and betrayal. "Then how do you explain this? Lila's blood type proves she can't be my daughter." My heart plummeted as I scanned the document, the stark reality of the incompatible blood types undeniable. Confusion swirled within me, kaleidoscopic shards of doubt and denial whirling in my mind. "There must be a mistake," I pleaded, grasping at any shred of rationality. "We need to get a second opinion or run more tests." "More tests?" Declan scoffed, his face twisted with contempt. "So you can fabricate more lies? I don't know what pathetic games you're playing, but I want you and that bastard child out of my house tonight." The venom in his words stung like acid, searing through the very fiber of my being. I opened my mouth to protest, but my throat constricted, robbing me of speech. How could the man I loved, the father of my child, hurl such vicious insults with such callous ease? Lila's muffled sobs drifted from her bedroom, a heartbreaking counterpoint to the maelstrom engulfing our home. Mustering every ounce of composure, I turned and went to her, cradling her tiny form as she clung to me, her tears soaking my blouse. "Mommy, why is Daddy so mad?" she whimpered, her innocent eyes brimming with fear and confusion. I stroked her hair, my own tears flowing freely now. "It's going to be okay, baby. Mommy's here," I whispered, the hollow reassurance tasting bitter on my tongue. The front door slammed, signaling Declan's departure. His mother, Eloise, regarded me with undisguised contempt, her judgmental stare searing into my soul. "I always knew you were trash," she spat, her words laced with venom. "God knows what other depraved secrets you're hiding." As she stormed out, I sank to the floor, cradling Lila in my arms, her tiny body racked with sobs. The walls seemed to close in around us, the once warm sanctuary of our home now a suffocating prison of shattered trust and broken dreams. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, my mind replayed the horrors of the day in an endless, torturous loop. Declan's accusations, Eloise's scathing condemnation, they burrowed into my psyche like parasitic worms, gnawing at my sanity, my self-worth eroding with every agonizing second. Yet, amid the maelstrom of despair, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I was innocent, and no matter how insurmountable the odds, I would fight to prove it. For Lila's sake and for my own, I would not surrender to the shadows of doubt. As the first tentative rays of dawn seeped through the curtains, I rose from the bed, my resolution steeled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. This was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a hard-fought battle for truth, justice, and redemption. The next few days blurred into a waking nightmare. Declan's rage had not subsided, his accusations growing more venomous with each passing hour. Eloise fanned the flames, her hateful whispers poisoning his mind against me. "You'll never see that child again," Declan snarled, his face contorted with rage. "Not until you admit to your sordid betrayal." I pleaded, reasoned, and begged, but my words fell on deaf ears. In their eyes, I was the embodiment of sin, a deceitful serpent who had violated the sanctity of our marriage. One evening, as I was preparing Lila's dinner, Declan stormed into the kitchen, his eyes wild with fury. Pack your things, he spat. You and that bastard are leaving tonight. Reeling from the impact of his words, I clutched Lila protectively. You can't do this, Declan. She's your daughter, for God's sake. His cruel laughter pierced the air, chilling me to the core. My daughter? Don't make me laugh. That little brat is a constant reminder of your infidelity, Lila whimpered, burying her face in my embrace as Eloise glowered from the doorway. You heard him, whore. Get out before we call the police. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I gathered our meager belongings, the weight of our shattered lives condensed into 2 battered suitcases. Lila clung to me, her tiny frame racked with sobs, her innocence shattered by the vitriol that surrounded us. As we stepped out into the night, the cold air stung my face, a harsh reminder of the cruel world that awaited us. Eloise's parting words sliced through the silence like a razor. Don't ever show your face here again, you lying tramp. In the days that followed, we drifted from shelter to shelter, our once comfortable existence reduced to a daily struggle for survival. I reached out to Tara, my former colleague and confidant, who embraced us with open arms. You're not alone in this, Mari, she vowed, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'll help you get back on your feet. True to her word, Tara secured us a modest apartment and arranged for me to interview at her marketing firm. As I sat across from the stern-faced interviewer, my heart raced with trepidation. So, Mrs. Turner, he drawled, his gaze piercing. Care to explain this gap in your employment history? I swallowed hard, bracing myself for the inevitable judgment. My husband falsely accused me of infidelity and threw us out. I've been fighting to clear my name ever since. His eyebrows arched, and for a moment I feared the worst. But then, to my surprise, he nodded slowly. I've seen my fair share of bitter divorces, he sighed. Welcome to the team, Marielle. We could use a fighter like you. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. Tara's unwavering support and the promise of a fresh start had reignited the flames of determination. I would not be cowed by Declan's vile accusations or the harsh realities that now defined our existence. No, this was not the end. It was merely the first salvo in a war for justice, dignity, and the reclamation of our lives. And I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and determination. Tara's steadfast friendship and the camaraderie of my new colleagues provided a much-needed anchor amidst the turbulence that had consumed my life. Yet, the shadow of Declan's accusations lingered, a constant specter that haunted my every waking moment. I knew that to reclaim my dignity and secure Lila's future, I needed more than moral support. I needed a legal strategy. You're not alone in this fight, Tara assured me one evening over coffee. I know someone who can help. A few days later, I found myself seated across from Vincent, a family lawyer whose reputation for tenacity preceded him. Let's cut to the chase, he began, his gaze unwavering. Declan's accusations are baseless, but proving paternity won't be easy. I nodded, steeling myself for the challenges ahead. We'll need to demand a proper genetic test, Vincent continued, and dig into Declan's background. Any skeletons in his closet could bolster your case. As the weeks progressed, I threw myself into the twin pursuits of work and legal preparations. Lila's well-being was my driving force, a beacon that guided me through the darkest moments. Mommy, when are we going home? She would ask, her innocent eyes brimming with confusion. Soon, baby, I'd reassure her, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. Mommy's working on it. At the office, I poured my heart into every project, determined to prove my worth and silence the whispers that still lingered. Yet, not everyone was supportive. Heard you're quite the little homewrecker, one colleague sneered during a team meeting. Bet you're loving all the attention, you slut. The words sliced through me like razor blades, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. As tears blurred my vision, a firm hand gripped my shoulder. That's enough, Carl. Tara's voice cut through the tension like a whip. Unless you want a harassment suit on your hands, I suggest you keep your vile thoughts to yourself. In that moment, I realized the true depth of Tara's loyalty, a wellspring of strength that would sustain me through the darkest valleys that lay ahead. As the weeks bled into months, Vincent's investigations began to bear fruit. Financial records, travel receipts, and witness testimonies painted a damning portrait of Declan's activities. one that suggested his accusations were merely a smokescreen for his own indiscretions. "We've got him," Vincent declared, a predatory gleam in his eye. "It's time to take the fight to Declan and bury him under the weight of his own lies." A renewed sense of purpose coursed through my veins. No longer was I the victim, cowering in the shadows of doubt. I was a warrior, armed with the truth and fueled by a mother's love, a force to be reckoned with in the battle for justice and redemption. As I gazed into Lila's eyes that night, I made a silent vow. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifices, I would emerge victorious. For her sake, and for the sake of every woman who had been wronged by the cruelty of men, I would not rest until the scales of justice were balanced once more. The deeper we delved into Declan's past, the more sordid revelations came to light. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of mistaken paternity quickly spiraled into a labyrinth of lies and deceit. "Look at this," Vincent growled one evening, slamming a stack of financial records onto the table. Unexplained cash withdrawals, luxury hotel charges, the paper trail points to something much darker than a simple affair. I pored over the documents, my stomach churning with each damning entry. The man I had once loved, the father of my child, was rapidly transforming into a stranger, a devious manipulator capable of unimaginable betrayal. "We need to dig deeper," I replied, my voice steely with determination. "No stone can be left unturned." In the weeks that followed, we assembled a mosaic of evidence, a tapestry woven from surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and digital footprints. The picture that emerged was one of a man consumed by greed, lust, and an insatiable appetite for deception. "He's been playing us all for fools," Vincent seethed, his fists clenched. The blood-type discrepancy was just a convenient cover for his own sordid affairs. My mind reeled as the truth unraveled, each revelation more gut-wrenching than the last. Declan's protestations of fidelity had been a carefully constructed facade, concealing a web of lies that stretched back years. "That bastard," I hissed, my fingers digging into the armrests. "All this time, he's been the one betraying us." Yet, amidst the maelstrom of anger and disillusionment, a glimmer of hope emerged. With the truth laid bare, we possessed the ammunition to dismantle Declan's house of cards, to strip away the veneer of righteousness and expose him for the duplicitous charlatan he truly was. "We're going to bury him," Vincent vowed, a predatory gleam in his eye. "He'll wish he never crossed paths with us." As the days ticked by, our case grew stronger, bolstered by irrefutable evidence and sworn testimonies. Declan's web of lies was unraveling, strand by damning strand, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. One evening, as I tucked Lila into bed, her innocent eyes brimmed with curiosity. "Mommy, why are you and Daddy fighting?" I swallowed hard, struggling to find the words to explain the betrayal that had shattered our lives. "Daddy did some very bad things," I began, choosing my words carefully. "But don't worry, sweetie, Mommy's going to make things right." Her small hand caressed my cheek, her touch a balm for the rawness that still lingered. "I love you, Mommy," she whispered, her voice laced with a wisdom far beyond her years. In that moment, I knew that no matter the obstacles, no matter the sacrifices, I would emerge victorious. For Lila's sake, and for the sake of every woman who had been wronged by the cruelty of men, I would not rest until justice was served. As I rose from her bedside, a renewed sense of purpose coursed through my veins. The time for tears and self-pity was over. Now was the moment to strike, to unleash the full force of our righteous fury upon the man who had so callously shattered our lives. Declan's reign of deception was nearing its end, and I would be the one to deliver the final devastating blow that would bring him to his knees. Justice, long denied, would finally be served. The weight of the evidence against Declan was staggering, a damning mosaic of lies and infidelity that threatened to unravel the very foundation of his carefully constructed charade. Yet, as the day of reckoning approached, a sense of trepidation gnawed at the edges of my resolve. "He's not going to go down without a fight," Vincent warned, his brow furrowed with concern. "Declan's got deep pockets and a nasty vindictive streak. Brace yourself for an all-out assault." His words proved prophetic. In the days leading up to the hearing, a torrent of allegations and character assassinations flooded the media, each more vicious than the last. Sources close to the family describe Marielle Turner as an unfit mother with a history of promiscuity and substance abuse. One lurid headline screamed. I recoiled in disgust, my hands trembling, as I read the litany of falsehoods and half-truths that had been woven into a nightmarish tapestry of lies. Don't let it get to you, Tara urged, her voice a steadying force amidst the storm. They're just trying to rattle you. Yet, as the days ticked by, the onslaught intensified, each salvo more devastating than the last. Strangers would hurl insults as I passed on the street, their words cutting deeper than any knife. Whore! Baby killer! Declan was too good for trash like you. The venom seeped into my pores, poisoning my mind with doubt and self-loathing. There were moments when the thought of surrender, of simply retreating into the shadows and letting Declan claim his hollow victory, seemed like a merciful release. But then, I would look into Lila's eyes, those pools of innocence that had been forever tainted by the cruelty of the world, and my resolve would harden once more. I won't let him win, baby, cradling her against me. Mommy's going to make everything right again. The night before the hearing, as I lay awake in the silence of our modest apartment, a sense of clarity washed over me. This was more than just a battle for custody or vindication. It was a war, a clash of ideologies that would reverberate far beyond the confines of our fractured lives. Declan embodied the worst aspects of patriarchal arrogance, the belief that wealth and status granted him the right to lie, cheat, and discard those who dared to challenge his authority. His actions were a poisonous manifestation of the toxic masculinity that had subjugated women for centuries, reducing us to mere chattels to be used and discarded at a man's whim. But I was the embodiment of a new order, a defiant spirit that refused to be cowed or silenced. In that moment, I understood that my battle transcended the personal. It was a clarion call for every woman who had been wronged, a beacon of hope that justice could prevail even in the darkest of times. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I rose from the bed, my eyes burning with resolve. The time for doubt and self-pity was over. The hour of reckoning had arrived. With Lila's hand clasped tightly in mine, I stepped out into the world, ready to face the storm that awaited us. Declan's reign of terror was about to end, and I would be the one to deliver the killing blow that would topple his empire of lies. This was more than just a courtroom battle. It was a war for the very soul of our society, a fight to exorcise the demons of misogyny and oppression that had festered for far too long. And I, armed with the truth and fueled by a mother's love, would be the avenging angel that rained judgment upon those who dared to subjugate and abuse. The time for justice had come, and I would not rest until the scales were balanced once more. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, each side bristling with barely contained hostility. Declan, impeccably groomed and flanked by his high-priced legal team, glowered at me from across the aisle, his eyes burning with contempt. As the proceedings commenced, his lawyers launched into a blistering assault, painting me as a morally bankrupt adulteress unfit for motherhood. Their words lashed like whips, each allegation more sordid than the last. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming, the lead counsel sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Mrs. Turner's promiscuity and utter disregard for the sanctity of marriage have irreparably damaged this family. I steeled myself, my fingers digging into the armrests as a tidal wave of rage threatened to consume me. But then Vincent rose to his feet, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. Your Honor, the defense's claims are nothing more than a smokescreen, a desperate attempt to conceal the truth about Mr. Turner's own egregious transgressions. With a deft flick of his wrist, he produced a sheaf of documents, slamming them onto the evidence table with a resounding thud. Financial records, travel receipts, surveillance footage, all pointing to a sordid web of infidelity and deceit that stretches back years. A hush fell over the courtroom as the damning evidence was presented, each piece fitting together like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. Declan's face drained of color, his carefully cultivated veneer of respectability crumbling with each revelation. You lying sack of filth, I hissed, my voice trembling with fury. All this time, you've been the one cheating. The blood type was just a convenient excuse to cover your own tracks. Declan recoiled as if struck, his eyes darting frantically from face to face, searching for an ally in the sea of condemnation that surrounded him. I can explain, he sputtered, his composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. Save your pathetic excuses, Vincent snarled, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The truth is laid bare for all to see. You're nothing but a spineless coward who hid behind false accusations to mask your own sins. As the revelations continued to unfold, each more damning than the last, the courtroom descended into pandemonium. Eloise, her face contorted in a rictus of disbelief and horror, turned on her son with a fury that would have cowed lesser men. "How could you?" she raged, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You've disgraced our family, brought shame upon us all with your lies and debauchery." Declan shrank back, his bravado evaporating in the face of his mother's wrath. In that moment, he was no longer the swaggering Titan who had so callously shattered our lives. He was a small, pitiful creature, exposed and vulnerable to the judgment of his peers. As the gavel thundered, restoring order to the courtroom, a hush fell over the proceedings. All eyes turned towards the judge, whose weathered face betrayed a lifetime of bearing witness to the depths of human depravity. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented," he intoned, his voice grave, "I have no choice but to rule in favor of Mrs. Turner. Full custody of the child, as well as a substantial settlement, will be awarded forthwith." A weight lifted from my shoulders, a burden that had pressed down upon me for far too long. As Declan was led away, his head bowed in shame, I turned to face the woman who had once been my mother-in-law. Eloise regarded me with a mixture of contrition and begrudging respect, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was wrong about you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." In that moment, I felt a pang of pity for the broken woman before me, a victim of her own toxic loyalty, blinded by her adoration for a son who had proven himself unworthy of such devotion. Extending my hand, I met her gaze with a steely resolve that brooked no argument. "Let's put the past behind us," I replied, my voice unwavering, "for Leela's sake." As our fingers intertwined, a bridge across the chasm of pain and betrayal, I knew that a new chapter was beginning. One forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the indomitable strength of a mother's love. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There would be other Declans, other malignant forces bent on subjugating and oppressing those they deemed inferior. But I would be ready, a warrior armed with the truth and fueled by an unquenchable thirst for justice. No longer would I cower in the shadows, cowering from the stinging lash of misogyny and cruelty. No, from this day forward, I would stand tall and defiant, a beacon of hope for all those who had been wronged, a living embodiment of the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. The reckoning had come, and I had emerged victorious, battered, perhaps, but unbroken and emboldened for the battles yet to come. In the aftermath of the courtroom battle, a surreal calm settled over our lives. Declan, disgraced and humiliated, had retreated into the shadows, his once formidable presence reduced to a mere specter haunting the fringes of our existence. The financial settlement, though substantial, felt like a hollow victory, a paltry compensation for the anguish and betrayal we had endured. Yet, as the dust settled and the harsh glare of public scrutiny faded, a new reality began to take shape. Eloise, her carefully constructed worldview shattered by the revelations of her son's duplicity, found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Gone was the imperious matriarch who had once so vehemently condemned me. In her place stood a shell of a woman, haunted by the ghosts of her own misjudgments. "I owe you an apology," she murmured one afternoon as we sat across from each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. I regarded her with a guarded expression, the wounds of her past transgressions still raw and throbbing. "For too long, I allowed my own prejudices to blind me to the truth," she continued, her voice tinged with regret. "I failed you, and more importantly, I failed Lila." A part of me yearned to unleash the torrent of pent-up fury that had festered for so long, to lash out and inflict upon her a fraction of the pain she had so callously inflicted upon us. But as I gazed into her haunted eyes, I saw not the imperious shrew who had once reveled in our suffering, but a broken woman, a victim of her own misguided loyalties and toxic ideologies. In that moment, a profound truth crystallized within me. Harboring hatred and resentment would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and oppression that had nearly destroyed us. "We've all made mistakes," I replied, my voice measured and even. "What matters now is how we move forward, as a family, for Lila's sake." Eloise's shoulders sagged, a tremulous sigh escaping her lips as a flicker of relief passed across her features. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've shown more grace and compassion than I ever deserved." As the weeks bled into months, a fragile truce took root between us. The path towards true reconciliation would be long and arduous, paved with the shattered remnants of our fractured trust. Yet, for Lila's sake, we persevered, two warriors, battle-scarred and weary, united by a shared commitment to forge a better future for the innocent caught in the crossfire of our conflict. Slowly, tentatively, the walls began to crumble, and glimmers of the family we had once been started to emerge from the rubble of our shattered lives. Lila, ever resilient, took the first steps towards healing the breach, her boundless love and infectious laughter serving as a balm for the wounds that still lingered. "Grandma, come play with us," she would call out, her eyes sparkling with unbridled joy. And Eloise, her defenses worn down by the relentless onslaught of childish innocence, would inevitably acquiesce, setting aside her trepidation and embracing the moment with a cautious tenderness. In those stolen moments, I caught fleeting glimpses of the woman she might have been. A loving matriarch, untainted by the corrosive influence of prejudice and toxic masculinity. As for Declan, his presence lingered like a malignant shadow, a constant reminder of the depths of betrayal we had endured. Yet with each passing day, his hold over us weakened, his once formidable aura of invincibility eroded by the unstoppable march of time and truth. We were survivors, battle-hardened and emboldened by the fires of adversity. The chains of oppression that had once bound us lay shattered at our feet, the shackles of fear and self-doubt cast aside in favor of a newfound strength and resilience. And as I gazed out upon the world that had once seemed so hostile and unforgiving, I felt a surge of hope swell within me, a beacon of promise that illuminated the path ahead. The war had been won, but the battle for true equality and justice was far from over. There would be other Declans, other malignant forces bent on subjugating and oppressing those they deemed inferior. But we would be ready, a united front forged in the crucible of suffering and tempered by the indomitable strength of a mother's love. No longer would we cower in the shadows, cowering from the stinging lash of misogyny and cruelty. No, from this day forward, we would stand tall and defiant, beacons of hope for all those who had been wronged. Living embodiments of the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. The reckoning had come, and we had emerged victorious. Battered, perhaps, but unbroken and emboldened for the battles yet to come. The weight of the past year's tumultuous events seemed to dissipate as I stepped across the threshold of our new home, a cozy two-story nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. This was more than just a fresh start. It was a physical embodiment of the hard-won victories that had carried us to this point. "What do you think, baby?" I asked, turning to Lila with a warm smile. Her eyes danced with unbridled delight as she took in the spacious surroundings, her tiny feet pattering across the hardwood floors. "I love it, Mommy," she exclaimed, twirling in a whirlwind of giddy excitement. Watching her, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude wash over me. This was the life she deserved. A sanctuary untainted by the specter of Declan's betrayal, a place where she could blossom and thrive, without the weight of our past struggles bearing down upon her. "I'm glad you approve," I chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. As the days melted into weeks, our new abode began to take on the warmth and character of a true home. Lila's vibrant artwork adorned the walls, splashes of color and whimsy that seemed to radiate a childlike joy. Yet, amidst the trappings of our fresh start, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of melancholy. The road that had led us here had been paved with pain and heartache, a crucible of suffering that had forged us into the warriors we had become. "You've come a long way, Mari," Tara murmured one evening as we sipped wine on the back patio, basking in the golden glow of the setting sun. I nodded, my gaze drifting to the horizon as memories of our shared struggles played out like a bittersweet symphony. There were times when I didn't think I'd make it, I admitted, my voice tinged with a hard-won wisdom. But you were there, every step of the way. I can never repay you for that. Tara's eyes shone with a mixture of pride and affection as she reached across the table, her hand enveloping mine in a warm, reassuring embrace. You don't have to, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Seeing you rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever, that's all the reward I could ever want. As the weeks bled into months, I found myself rediscovering the passions and ambitions that had once defined me. With Lila's future secured and the specter of Declan's betrayal fading into a distant memory, I turned my sights towards the next chapter of my life. The marketing firm welcomed me back with open arms, and I threw myself into my work with a renewed vigor, channeling the hard-won lessons of my ordeal into a driving force that propelled me ever forward. You've got fire in your belly, Turner, my boss remarked one day, a glint of admiration in his eye. Keep this up, and you'll be running the show before you know it. As I climbed the corporate ladder, each rung a testament to my tenacity and resilience. A part of me couldn't help but revel in the delicious irony of it all. The very traits that Declan had sought to crush and subjugate, my strength, my independence, my unwavering spirit, were now the cornerstones of my success. Yet for all my professional triumphs, it was the quiet moments with Lila that truly brought me solace and fulfillment. Watching her blossom into a confident, vibrant young woman filled me with an indescribable sense of pride and wonder. You're my hero, Mommy, she would whisper, her eyes brimming with adoration as she snuggled against me on the couch, our nightly ritual of story time and cuddles unfolding like a cherished tradition. In those moments, I felt a profound connection to the unbroken chain of strong, resilient women who had come before me, warriors who had fought and bled to carve out a space in a world that had sought to diminish and subjugate them. And as I gazed into Lila's innocent face, I silently vowed to honor their legacy, to be the embodiment of the unwavering spirit that refused to be cowed or broken. The years melted away, each one marked by triumphs and challenges, laughter and tears, the ebb and flow of life's rich tapestry. Yet, through it all, one constant remained, the bond between mother and daughter, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by an unbreakable love. As the twilight of my life began to cast its gentle glow, I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had brought me to this point. The struggles, the heartache, the hard-won battles, they had all been necessary steps on a journey that had tested the very limits of my strength and resilience. And as I looked out upon the world, I saw not just the scars of my own trials, but the countless other women who had faced their own battles, their own Declans to conquer. In that moment, I knew that my story was more than just a personal triumph. It was a rallying cry, a beacon of hope for all those who had been wronged, oppressed, and subjugated. For in the end, it was not the weight of our burdens that defined us, but the indomitable spirit that refused to be crushed beneath them. We were warriors, forged in the crucible of adversity, our scars a testament to the battles we had waged and the victories we had won. And as I took my final breath, secure in the knowledge that my legacy would live on through Lila and the generations to come, I felt a sense of profound peace wash over me. The war was won, the battles had been fought, and in the end, justice and resilience had prevailed. We were the unbroken, the unbowed, and our stories would echo through the ages as a reminder of the indomitable strength of the human spirit.